All right. So welcome, as Marylise noted, this is the second iteration of the second Community Leaders Circle workshop. We're really appreciative that you're able to join us tonight and share some of your evening with us. I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement before we get into this evening's program. The City of Toronto acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The city also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Welcome. Just want to recognize that this land acknowledgement is deeply meaningful for the Our Plan project team. It is something that we are working to embody in all of the work that we're doing, including the outreach with Indigenous organizations and communities, and recognizing that working towards Indigenous self-determination and relationship building is a core part of the Our Plan Toronto process. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the meeting, a couple of housekeeping items. I want to stress that we really do want this to be a very interactive meeting. We want to have your questions and your comments kind of shared throughout the course of the meeting. So please do stay muted when you are not talking, just so that we don't have too much interference. And if you are using a smartphone, note that you can switch between the webcam and slideshow view in order to be able to see the slides. Live transcription has been enabled. If you would prefer or would like to have that enabled on your screen to assist with your ability to follow along in the meeting, please do. And if you have a question or comment, please use the raise hand function or type your question into the chat box all the way through the presentation. And we will be having some pause points scheduled throughout the course of the meeting where you will get an opportunity to ask questions. So please do bring your questions forward. We want to make sure that you do get all your questions answered and have an opportunity to participate fully tonight. And as mentioned, we are recording the presentation component of the meeting, but any items where there is any identifying information of participants, Q&A or discussion will be removed from that recording. So we want you to feel as comfortable as possible with sharing openly and honestly with us tonight. Just a little reminder on Zoom, which you'll see on the next slide. I know most of us are very comfortable with Zoom so far, or at least by now, but just a quick reminder, the chat box is on the bottom kind of center of your screen. You'll also have the raise hand function through the reactions tab. And if you're joining us via a mobile phone, you'll see both of those options in the menu. Both the raise hand and the chat are in the same kind of menu block. So please feel free to use those and to use the reactions or anything else you'd like to in order to participate. So as mentioned, my name is Zara Jaffer. I am a planner with Dillon Consulting and a member of the community engagement team for this project. Joining us tonight are a number of members from the City of Toronto's team, led by Jeff Cantos, who's a project manager, and the consulting team led by Marylise Willemse, who you'll be hearing from shortly as well, and all of you, the CLC. So as Marylise had mentioned at the outset of this meeting, and I'll just reiterate, we did have one earlier meeting last week, and you'll see on the next slide the overall breakdown of the CLC membership. We are really pleased to be welcoming a number of Indigenous organizations to the CLC for this round of engagement, including Anishinaabe Homes, ENAGB, Indigenous Youth Agency, Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. We have members of our organization with us tonight, as well as the Toronto Indigenous Business Association, Two-Spirited People of the First Nations, and the Native Women's Resource Center of Toronto. So we're really looking forward to a great discussion with you this evening, and we'll be talking a little bit about some of the things that we heard in the last meeting as well. So just moving on, and you know, we'll certainly do a round of introductions once we kind of pause for discussion. But to get us through the agenda and to make sure we're making the best use of all of your time this evening, just to let you know what is on our table for tonight. We have a presentation that Jeff will be providing to walk us through what the city's OP, the official plan, does and what it is that the city is updating, and really think about how the OP impacts our daily lives in Toronto. And then reflect on what we've heard to date. We've been doing a lot of engagement since we last met with the CLC early in June. So we want to share with you what we've been hearing and get your thoughts on things that we may have missed. We also want to share as a group a conversation around what does better look like and do some deeper dives on the core themes or key things that we've been hearing so far. And then collaborate with you on ideas for community outreach and engagement so that we can make sure we're taking this conversation as far and wide as we can and getting a lot of diverse voices to participate in the Our Plan Toronto process. So that's our agenda for tonight. Just a reminder of the kind of space that we are working to co-create. It is both a safe space and a brave space. And we hope that we can get there with you by communicating openly, making sure that we are maintaining one another's privacy and confidentiality outside this space, and that we are holding space for that deep conversation, that we are all going to take space by sharing our views and make space as well. So we make sure that we hear from everyone, and that we make sure that everything that is said to us is taken in an authentic and a sincere way. And we will respect differences and opinions and make sure that we're not here to privilege any particular view over another. So with that, we're going to get into the capacity building portion of tonight's presentation. And before I hand over to Jeff, I just want to give a little bit of context for why we have this particular item on the agenda. It really is stemming from some of the feedback that we heard from the CLC in the first meeting, recognizing that a number of folks do want to get a better understanding of what the official plan is, what it does now, how does it manifest in conditions on the ground, where are the opportunities to really influence the official plan. And so that's what really Jeff is going to help walk us through. And this is really an opportunity for you to get all of your questions out on the official plan, on what's working and what's not working, and how we measure that. So please do share as we go. And I'll hand it over to Jeff now.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, thanks Marlies. Thanks Sarah for the intro. So my name is Jeff Cantos. I'm the manager for the city's official plan team, and I'm joined by members of my team. And if you have questions, feel free to pause and just unmute, and we can take your question. Or if you feel more comfortable using the chat, please feel free to put comments and questions in the chat. My team members are there to help respond and add clarification as we go. So I just wanted to start off by talking about the approach that we're taking here at the City of Toronto with our official plan review, and talk a little bit about the policy planner's role. So I myself am a policy planner, as is my team members on the call. And our job and our role is to interpret, review, and apply provincial legislation. I don't know if you've ever heard of the adage that the municipalities are creatures of the province. So the province set the rules for all of the municipalities in Ontario, and we at the municipality level, at the city level, we interpret and we review and apply those for our own local condition. And how do we do that? We do that by consulting with interested parties, stakeholders, and members of the public, including creating the CLC, the Community Leaders Circle. And based on input from the public, we evaluate and write policies. And at the end of the policy development process, we as policy planners, we provide our professional opinion and recommendations to City Council. We're not the decision makers. We just give our professional advice to those that make these decisions. That is the members of City Council and the mayor, the 25 councillors and the mayor. Okay, and on the next slide, how we've been, or a principle that we're applying through the official plan review that we're talking about today, is applying the equity lens. And one of the approaches that we want to take is correcting inequitable outcomes and making sure that our outcomes are transformative and not affirmative. And on the right there is a picture of the Minneapolis official plans. They go out to 2040, and their first stated goal in their official plan is eliminate disparities. And it reads, in 2040, Minneapolis will see all communities fully thrive regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, country of origin, religion, or zip code, having eliminated deep-rooted disparities in wealth, opportunity, housing, safety, and health. And so, you know, I draw a lot of inspiration to be as aspirational as Minneapolis is in their official plan, knowing full well that Minneapolis, you know, is a city of 400,000, while we're a city of 2.7 million. But it is those bold moves, those bold statements that we're hoping to put forward and recommend to council. And in doing so, we're actually working with students from X University, formerly Ryerson. We have a group of students doing a jurisdictional scan, Minneapolis being one of the cities that they're looking at, and other cities of how other municipalities have innovatively applied the equity lens in their land use policy documents. And so that work is ongoing. And the city is committed to doing things very differently. We have committees of council that council spark, and these are committees that provide advice to city council. Some of them are the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. Again, they provide advice to council. There's the Two-Spirit, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Advisory Committee also that provides recommendations and advice to city council. We at City Planning are developing a planning equity toolkit, and to make you know, a long story short, this planning equity toolkit is a partnership between the city, Wellesley Institute, and Monument, and to provide our on-the-ground planners, those development planners that look at development applications across the city, and policy planners, how to integrate equity considerations into their day-to-day planning work. And the intended outcome of this toolkit that we are developing and hoping to have on stream and online, hopefully by the end of this year, is to be able to identify and understand the clear set of values that are fundamental to equity-based engagement, because we know we have to do things differently and not, you know, be transformative as opposed to do things the way they were before. The City Planning is undertaking a number of planning studies with an equity-based focus. One of them is the Little Jamaica study, where we're exploring a cultural district designation to help support businesses in the area, and to address, you know, issues of exclusion and displacement in the community. And again, there's a number of citywide equity initiatives. You know, two notable examples is the access to city services for undocumented Torontonians. There's a refugee resettlement program. There's a Toronto newcomer strategy, and then many, many more, just to name a few. Next slide, please. So at a high level, land use planning, we work again within a policy-led system, and at the top of this system is provincial legislation, again, the law. And the province sets out the law, and the ones that governs our work is the Planning Act and the Places to Grow Act. There are others, but these are the two main pieces of legislation that we rely upon. And the province also sets out provincial plans and statements. So there's the provincial policy statement that is a very high-level document and a set of values that the province puts out that all municipalities' land use decisions must be consistent with. And for us in the greater Golden Horseshoe area, that's basically the 416 and the 905, there's a growth plan. Again, all our land use decisions must conform to the province's growth plan. And at the city level, we have our own city vision, and we interpret and apply the provincial policies and statements. And we have our official plan, which I'll talk about in a bit in more detail. And our vision gets implemented through other documents like the zoning bylaw. And the zoning bylaw is more about the precision, how tall your building is, how wide it is, the setbacks, and those things. And community-based planning, we do local area studies, For example, there was I think it was a 2 or 3 year program in the Golden Mile where they did a secondary plan study there. There's other local area studies that happen all across the city. And then at the site-specific level, there are processes like site plan control, and that's just to make sure that there's enough parking spaces and toilets can flush and garbage can get picked up, and minor variants. And those are usually, more often than not, for single unit dwellings if you want to make an expansion to your house. So again, very, very, very site specific. So our OP contains 5 chapters, and the first chapter being making choices. The second one, and making choices, that chapter is centered around, about the long-term vision, the shared values, and provides policies that help guide decision-making on land development. And in chapter 2 is more about the structure of the city, and sections in chapter 2 speak to the economy, the downtown, natural environment, and intensification. Whereas chapter 3, building a successful city, goes into a little bit more detail and talks about more thematic policy sections like heritage or the built form or public realm and housing. If you heard in the news yesterday, City Council adopted an inclusionary zoning policy and framework for new developments, for certain developments in Toronto in the future, that they will have that we can require a percentage of those units to be affordable. And so those policy changes fit it into chapter 3. Chapter 4, land use designations, I'll talk about in a bit. And then chapter 5 are basically called Making Things Happen, is our toolbox. So the tools that we will use to help implement the previous chapters. And in the next slide, so as I mentioned in chapter 2, we talked about our structure. And this map of the city shows the urban structure of the map, and it identifies areas in which we are directing growth and areas that we are not. So the areas where growth is directed is to our avenues. These are arterials, Eglinton, Shepherd, Finch, Eglinton, Kingston Road. You can kind of see them, the brown corridors. Our centers, we have North York Center, Young Eglinton Center, Scarborough Center, Etobicoke Center. We have our employment areas, and these are areas where we are directing non-residential growth to make sure that we have jobs across the city. And then the downtown central waterfront, obviously there in the center, and our green space system. So those are the urban structure, and many different municipalities have a very similar type map at a high level. And then the next level of mapping, in the next slide, is our land use designations. So on the left is the map of the city's land use designations across the city. But on the right is, if you were to break down the city into 100 blocks, you would see that there in the middle, roads account for about 19–20%, which do not have a land use designation. Neighborhoods at the bottom is about 35% of our city. Up top, the growth-related designation, so the mixed-use areas, about 5%. And as I mentioned, our employment areas, which are not intended for residential growth, but employment growth is about 13% of our land base. Okay, and on the next slide, when we speak about our employment lands, the 13%, some really quick stats. It's, like I said, it's 13% of all of the city's land base. These purple lands are employment lands, but it houses 25% of all the jobs across the city. So over 400,000 jobs on the city. And of all the manufacturing jobs, manufacturing, industrial, and warehousing jobs in the city, 92% are housed here in our employment areas. And these lands are important to us, A, because they're finite. The city is not growing. We're unlike other municipalities in the region that can expand their urban boundaries. We don't have that opportunity, so we have to intensify. So we take very careful consideration when landowners want to change the land use in our employment areas. These lands offer economic and job opportunities, and like I said, 92% of jobs of all manufacturing and industrial warehousing jobs are found in these employment areas. And these are jobs that are generally known as low barrier entry jobs for newcomers who more often than not do not get their professional accreditation acknowledged in our country when they arrive. And so these provide economic and employment opportunities for all skill sets across the city. Not everyone is going to be an office worker in Toronto, and we recognize that. And then the next slide, I talked about the 35% of the land that is neighborhoods. So there's and the yellow lands, those are it. And there's many planning initiatives underway. There is a initiative called Expanding Housing Options in Neighborhoods, looking at expanding permissions to open up access into the neighborhoods, because we do know that there is an affordable housing crisis at the moment. And like I said, 35% of our city is designated neighborhoods, and only 5% is mixed use. So figuring out how we can strike a better balance, to provide more access to communities and help address affordability across the city. As I mentioned, inclusionary zoning was passed by council yesterday, and coupled with inclusionary zoning, the city changed the affordable housing definition. So affordable housing is no longer tied to average market rent in Toronto. It's tied to an individual's income, so their ability to pay. There's the initiative that's still going on, our multi-tenant or rooming house initiative, and recently the city went through the rapid rehousing initiative, which rezoned city-owned properties for modular housing, which provides more permanent, dignified housing for people experiencing homelessness. And the city leased a couple and purchased a couple hotels to do the same, to relocate individuals experiencing homelessness into these hotels across the city. So that sets out the planning framework that the city, that we as city planners have carriage of. There is also the Toronto Corporate Strategic Plan. And this, the strategic plan, the corporate strategic plan, guides the work of more divisions than just city planning. Well, all the other divisions beyond city planning, but including city planning. And so the corporate strategic plan outlines the city's commitment to people, partnerships, performance, and priorities. And I'll talk really quickly about the 4 priorities. And I'll have Kyle and our team put the link in the chat, because the link to this document in the next slides, when I rhyme off some of the initiatives, are hyperlinks to specific priorities. So we'll talk about the 4 strategic priorities within this document. The first one being maintaining great housing that's affordable. That's great. You can go to the next slide. So the first strategic priority is centered on affordable housing. So the city is committed to families and individuals where they can live in safe, stable, and affordable housing, and with respect and dignity. So when you go to the document, you'll see these initiatives there, and then you can hyperlink to each specific one. So for example, the poverty reduction strategy, the Tenants First, the Seniors Housing Corporation, and the Toronto Senior Strategy. So that's the first of the 4. On the next slide is the second strategic priority within the corporate strategic plan, is called improving mobility. And here it states that the city is committed to safe, affordable, accessible transportation choices for people and goods. And those are the number of initiatives that the city as a corporation are undertaking. So for example, the cycling network plan, the free floating car share pilot, the rapid transit network expansion, and many more. The next slide, and this is one of 2. So this is the next strategic priority, which is centered on quality of life. And here, the city is committed to protect and improve quality of life for all, including safety, health, and social economic well-being and inclusion. And this, the gamut of initiatives here range from biodiversity strategy to the ravine strategy to actually the official plan that we're reviewing as part of this corporate strategic priority. And then the next slide is just 2 of 2 more initiatives that include Toronto's action plan to confront anti-Black racism, the Toronto Newcomer Strategy, to the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy. So again, a wide-ranging list of initiatives corporately that the city is undertaking. And the final priority within the corporate strategic plan is tackling climate change. And here, the city is committed to fighting climate change and preparing our city government, our economy, our ecosystems, and our communities, especially the most vulnerable communities, for a changing climate. And the initiatives here, the list is there, from the Green Roof Bylaw to the Parkland Strategy to the Toronto Green Standard, to the Wet Weather Flow Master Plan. And so those are the city's priorities within the corporate strategic plan. And so these next couple of slides kind of show, the city as we are today, and some of the outcomes that we're experiencing today. So this slide shows the rate of population change. So the greener the part of the city, the greener the part of the city is, the greater rate of population change. So green, high levels of change. So if you look down the south by the lake, the downtown, the Yonge Street corridor, lots of green, which means great amount of change, versus the more purple, pinky, the darker purple you are, those are areas of the city actually experiencing population decrease. And then the orange outline are our city's neighborhood improvement areas. And I always get this number wrong. I believe there are 35 or 41 of them across the city. And you see where our neighborhood improvement areas are and what levels of predominantly population decrease is happening. The next slide. And so where is growth being proposed? So this map shows the proposed residential units across the city being proposed by developers and where they're located. So the bigger the bubble, the more units are being proposed. And the red bubbles are those built projects, the orange ones are active projects, and the green ones are projects under review. So you can see that there's, again, lots of growth happening in the downtown, or being proposed. There's lots of growth being proposed on our arterials. Remember the avenues I talked about: Shepherd, Finch, Eglinton, Kingston, St. Clair, etc. So you can see there's growth being proposed there, and pockets around the city as well. Okay, and the next slide shows where the jobs are today. And so the darker blue, the greater amount of jobs there are. So again, the downtown core, where there's a great proportion of predominantly office and service sector jobs, and jobs scattered across the city. And if you know the TTC line, you can almost see the Yonge line, the Yonge Spadina line, and how transit and jobs are the correlation between the two. The next slide, I think I've got just a couple more slides, are household incomes across the city. So the darker the green, the greater the median household income. And if you know the work of David Hulchansky in the Three Cities, you can kind of see that here in this map, where there is a bit of a U across the city, where incomes are much, the household median incomes are much lower versus the center. So second last slide. So we've also looked at the Toronto Vital Signs report, which is a report that looks at many different criteria and aspects of the city, and the issues and the challenges that the city, the Torontonians are facing. For example, rising costs of living is not equal to the change in wages, affordable housing, food security, Indigenous truth and reconciliation, safety and discrimination, women and childcare, unemployment, job security, and education, and the digital divide. So we've also had a look at this study. So lastly from me, this process that we're undertaking with you, with members of the community, with Torontonians, is that we've called Our Plan Toronto. It is about making choices for 2051. And we do want to accurately identify the disparities that we're experiencing across the city so that we can write policies that are transformative. So we do want to come up with principles for a successful Toronto. We do want to come up with an urban structure that helps direct growth where it's needed the most, and ensure that we are taking this, the lens of access and affordability to housing, and making sure that climate change we are addressing climate change because, again, a plan for 2051 needs to be a one that addresses climate change. And in doing this process, we want to make sure that we're also balancing other city building priorities. Like I said, the corporate strategic plan, which I walked through, COVID rebuild and recovery, making sure that we are addressing, systemic exclusion and displacement, and as I mentioned, or as Zara mentioned, integrating Indigenous reconciliation into our land use planning framework. We know that this is something that's lacking in our OP, and we want to, get that process right and put it into the official plan. And then, we want to become, the example, like I use Minneapolis, who took this bold initiative to have a 2041 goal of eliminating disparities.
So many of you may have seen, or a few of you may have seen this slide before, but I just want to kind of contextualize where we are in the process. So all the work that the city is doing around reviewing the official plan policies and thinking about the updates required or edits required kind of is in these kind of 3 process phases. And part 1 started earlier this year, and that was really just like a initial snapshot. And some of the members here today were part of those conversations around what does the future need to look at and consider as we grow and as Toronto evolves. And now we're focusing on these big questions. So we've had a number of meetings with stakeholders and internal city staff and Indigenous community members about different issues, seniors strategy table, etc., on some of the big questions. And then essentially this last year really has been a year of listening on the side of the city, of hearing and taking in what the priorities need to be and the directions, etc., for them to then work forward in setting policy direction and then into draft policy. So that's what will come next based on all the conversations that we're having. And there's lots of different areas of input that we're receiving content from. So I'm going to go through a few of them right now. I won't go through all of them. And I want to preface all of this with the fact that there is no one tool to hear the broad range of perspectives across the whole city. And so there is a lot of things that we're doing, and a number of meetings, and doing virtual outreach and online tools, etc., to try to get different voices. But one of the key things with the CLC and that we want to talk about tonight is how to connect with the community members that many of you work with. And so what we acknowledge is that often the least represented in these processes are those that are marginalized, experiencing challenges related to employment and poverty and housing. And these are groups that we absolutely want to hear from and make sure are reflected in the opinions of where the city needs to focus their effort, which is a big reason why we're meeting with you. So as I said, we had that first round that started earlier this year with initial meetings. We've had a project video and bulletin. We've had a series of meetings over this fall, so over October and November. And we continue to have meetings that are follow-up with Indigenous rights holders and organizations that are continuations of conversations, and then the community leaders circle conversations that we're having now. And ultimately, what we'd like to package in this is that the next steps, we kind of have more one-on-one discussions with all of you about how to work with you to connect with people in your community. And that may be more done on an individual basis, but we'll have an initial discussion about that tonight. So we did get a couple questions about who we're reaching out to and some of the Indigenous consultations. So, so far we are the treaty rights holders and caretakers that are part of the core conversations are the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, 6 nations of the Grand River, as well as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Williams Treaty Nations, under which there are multiple different nations that are part of that, and the Huron-Wendat. And then we have overall advisory coming from AAC, which is the Aboriginal Affairs Advisory Committee for the for council at the City of Toronto, as well as TASK, which is more broad outside of the City of Toronto, but representative of Indigenous organizations who operate and function within the City of Toronto and are very connected to and aware of the issues and the challenges facing Indigenous populations in the city today. And some of the key organizations that we've been reaching out to and trying to have conversations with about different ways and different interests of Indigenous people living and working in Toronto. There's a longer list, but I'll leave this. And as Zara said, all of this, you'll see a number of lists. We are going to share the slide deck tomorrow, so we'll be able to get that to you, and you can see that in more detail. In terms of overall what we've heard so far, so this word cloud is accumulation of the key things that we've been hearing through conversations with stakeholders, Indigenous community members, internal city divisions, the CLC, the public. We've had a couple of public consultations as well. And ultimately, the bigger the word, the more we're hearing it. So in terms of the future of Toronto and Toronto in 2051, people want it to be sustainable, affordable, and equitable, green, walkable, vibrant, livable, inclusive, accessible. And there's also some challenges that people also flip this on the other side and say, I'm also worried that in 2051 we'll be overdeveloped, or we won't have any public realm, or we'll be huge and not manageable or too expensive. So we're hearing both sides, both those from kind of more an optimistic lens and also those from the cautious and concerned lens. This is a summary of the biggest things that we are hearing. So this slide kind of pulls it all together, and I'll break down a few after this, but ultimately on the left are kind of the biggest, what we're hearing most, the biggest challenges. So environment, climate, and this is not in order, it's, you know, there's no priority here of this key list, but ultimately all of them matter and need attention. Environment, climate change, and sustainability. Housing supply, access, and affordability. So that's also looking at the type of housing that's available across the city. Equity in terms of inclusivity, accessibility, addressing discrimination, and equity in process. So how things are implemented and administered and managed. Healthy and resilient communities, which are kind of related to all of the above. And building complete communities throughout Toronto. So that's related to the others, but the key there is the throughout Toronto. What we have heard a lot about is feeling that there's quite an imbalance. There are complete communities, but they're not everywhere. And so it creates a challenge for those places that may have only housing or no jobs or no transit or lack of public realm, etc. So wanting to see that achieved more broadly. And then COVID recovery and rebuild. This is a key theme that's coming up in particular in the conversations around business and employment as a key area of interest. On the right-hand side, you'll see a number of the elements. I won't go through all of them, but I think that what I want to point out is that there are other big challenges as well, obviously, that the city needs to address. Reconciliation is in there, but also dealing with governance, safety has been a big thing, and well-being. Diversity of jobs and issues related to seniors and aging populations and our demographic shifts that are being experienced across cities in North America. From the Indigenous input, some of the key things that we have heard so far and the topics of interest, the conversations we're having right now have a broad range of questions and conversations also about needing to share grievances and concerns about historical processes that are part of this, and then how to support going forward and how to build relationships and support capacity, but bringing forward Indigenous voices and perspectives, particularly in relation to our relationships with the natural environment and wildlife, as well as addressing housing and the housing affordability crisis for Indigenous people, connecting people with nature, reflecting Indigenous past, present, and future in the official plan, specifically and calling that out and building ongoing relationships and committing to those ongoing relationships. We've also had a public poll that's still live. We've had about 1,100 responses so far. Just a snapshot here of where the responses are coming from. They're very centered in the Toronto East York area. So by all means, with your networks, please share to broaden the lens. We have been advertising. We've been using paid advertisements to target areas outside of the downtown core and to target minorities, but we haven't been able to get as much of a response as we were hoping. So encouraged to get that out to your networks where possible. So far, what we've been hearing, top 5 issues of interest around growth. So the poll is specific to kind of addressing growth in the city and land use, affordable housing, a range of housing types, access to transit and transportation, improving green spaces, ravines and parks, addressing climate change, and getting cycling and pedestrian connections across the city. Some of the things people are valuing in their neighborhoods right now, in some cases, is access to transit, the green spaces and ravines that we do have in the tree canopy, some of the cycling and walking networks that have been built out, the small and medium businesses and local shops. We hear that a lot about the vibrancy of the local areas and people liking to be able to go to their neighborhood shops, and the diversity within the city that we are seeing. In the community leaders circle, we have heard so far some of the biggest concerns are inclusive and accessible community design, housing access and affordability, access to employment, food security, mobility overall, so safe and equitable connections, so a range of types of connections, governance, and the need for collaboration. And that really relates to community planning and community-based planning and addressing systemic discrimination as well as safety. Some of the key things about centering equity in all of the work going forward relate to planning for complete communities and prioritizing housing as a right. And that includes access and affordability. Integrating employment in communities, I think Larry was getting at that as well, that achieving a range of employment in communities, employment options, considering access to transit as well as safe cycling routes, that's come up quite a lot across the city, centering community-based planning and anti-racism, and addressing the social determinants of health through planning. So some of the key health indicators to plan for healthy and resilient communities. And last week, what we heard from the CLC, this is just a high-level summary, but some key input that we heard was a need to review and take input from past engagements. So we definitely heard that people, some people, obviously not everyone, but some people feel that the input has been shared, whether through other planning initiatives or other consultation activities. It's clear people feel like they've shared their input and they want to see the action. So needing to look back on and kind of mine through and dig through other consultations to make sure we're hearing from those and not just constantly going out for new information. A reiteration that equity, anti-discrimination, and inclusion should be a top priority. Learning from others and taking what others are doing as good examples. There, in the previous CLC, there was quite a lot of interest around what Jeff presented on what other municipalities are doing, like Minneapolis, and suggesting that we should be learning from them and taking some of that language. Bringing forward tackling poverty as a priority. Over consultation with a limited change is a concern. That's one of the things I talked about in terms of wanting to look at the past engagements. Achieving complete communities, as we've discussed, and access to transit, needing more affordable and broad range of housing in all communities, and particular attention in apartment neighborhoods and newcomer areas. So all in all, some of the, what is really interesting for us is that we are hearing a consensus in many ways across a broad range of people that we're speaking with around the key issues of housing, affordability, transit connections, jobs and access to a range of jobs. These are coming up at every meeting. Climate change as well, although I would suggest that maybe with the CLC we've heard less on climate change, and that may be because many of the populations that CLC members are working with are facing critical issues today and are maybe not as concerned with the climate crisis immediately compared to housing or food security or safety. Not to say that the climate crisis wouldn't be a key priority, but we're not hearing it as frequently amongst the CLC members, given, especially with COVID, some of the pressing issues today. And then, you know, all of this kind of leads us to wanting to dive into some of these key priorities with you now.